know. Cassandra. And you are?
And collectively, half the fan base of Assassin's Creed squealed with excitement. I don't want to know what the other half were thinking. Yes, Cassandra is back, and she's crossed over into Valhalla. Other than the slightly overlapping stories in Rogue and Unity, there's never been a crossover like this between the main protagonists in Assassin's Creed before. And you know what? I'm on board for this. But this is what Ubisoft do. They make games that are an absolute chore to get through, but make me grow attached to their protagonists. I'm convinced this is how I'll be drawn into whatever Assassin's Creed Infinity is, because they'll give me back somebody I won't be able to resist playing as again. They could give me a whole game of this and I wouldn't question how implausible it is, because they're giving me what I want. Well, I wasn't wrong, was I? They gave me what I wanted, and it was the most excited I've been for Assassin's Creed in a long time. And it was free! A whole new story mission in Valhalla and in Odyssey. I've got to give Ubisoft some credit on this one. Going back to a 3-year-old game and giving it such a large story mission for free is a bit of dedication to what they've done here. On top of that, they've offered a free weekend to play Odyssey, which would probably be enough time for somebody who has only played Valhalla to go back and give Odyssey enough of a try and play through the one story mission. I'll warn you now, this will contain spoilers. I won't be able to stop myself because between both sides of the crossover, I found some nice touches and some things I think are important towards character development. Let's start with Cassandra and Odyssey, will we? Cassandra has gone to the island of Corfu for a vacation. You do you, Cassandra. I won't judge you for going on an island for 6 months and doing nothing but drink and eat. To the point you admit you're out of shape. I think you deserve the break. However, the drinking session is cut short by Barnabas and Herodotus, turning up and leading her on a hunt for treasure. Naturally, it all goes a bit wrong, and there's a piece of Eden involved. And Alethea, so nothing good comes from any of this. The treasure on the island is of course a piece of Eden, and naturally it's having a bit of a bad effect on anybody who touches it. After the piece of Eden breaks Cassandra's spear and blasts off across the island, I'm not kidding, it blasts off, Alethea drops into Cassandra's head, and summons her to a tomb. Because what is Odyssey without a tomb? Turns out, there are more pieces of Eden all over the world, and somebody needs to locate them to protect people. Cassandra isn't totally down for this new job role, and it takes Barnabas locating the piece of Eden and going a bit mad to make Cassandra face up to her immortal destiny, and really quite a nice lead into just how she ends up on the Isle of Skye. This one story mission neatly ties up Cassandra's life in Greece and sets her up for what she does next, and in the years leading up to her final meeting with Layla in the present day. There's one small issue, though I think it'll only be an issue if you played as Alexios. Like the rest of Odyssey, you can play this mission as Alexios, but he's not going to make it to the Isle of Skye in Valhalla. It'll be Cassandra only. Not an issue for me, but I do imagine it would be a bit of a disconnect for anybody who has only played as Alexios. Though this does really make it all official that Cassandra was the canon protagonist in Odyssey. Gee, rather than getting into this little mess with protagonists, you'd think they'd just go with Cassandra, right? Or is it too much like common sense? Or just not the way their marketing works? So what happens in Valhalla? Naturally, somebody has turned up at Ravensthorpe. Why does this happen so much? Oh, Eivor, this is my second cousin's third husband, Billy Bob, who just got here from the far-flung reaches of Europe. They've got a bit of trouble at home. Do you fancy sailing all the way over there and sorting it out for them? You'll give them a lift back there, right? Alright, it wasn't that convoluted. It's a seer from the Isle of Skye who just so happens to have turned up to have a word with Valkar about the fact nobody on the island can sleep. Well, apparently Valkar's been having visions too, and she really thinks Eivor should go and check this out. And why would Eivor care about this? Because Valka had a vision that Randvi would be the root of it all. So off we go to the Isle of Skye, and after talking to a few inhabitants of the island, we head to a church, and who do we find? It's Randvi! No, it's not. Of course it's not. What'd you do? Stow aboard the longship? Fly there? It's Cassandra. I mean, come on Eivor, surely you know what your girlfriend looks like. I know Randvi and Cassandra have the same hairstyle, but there's really not much else that's similar about them. Have you been on the mushrooms again? So, the girls hit it off straight away. And the two reluctantly agree to work together to find, you guessed it, a piece of Eden. It's what's affecting everybody on the island. There are some nice touches when Cassandra and Eivor are together. If you use Odin's sight around Cassandra, she'll light up differently and make a jingly noise, and it's a nice touch. You're also required to complete a standing stone puzzle, and there's an exchange between them about how Eivor can see something that Cassandra can't, indicating that her Odin's sight works a little differently to the eagle vision that Cassandra has.
That's it? There's nothing. Ah, of course you don't see it. You don't have my gifted sight. That gift wouldn't run in the family, would it? Who might your parents be? Mind yourself and focus.
The two make their way to the vault where the piece of Eden is stored, and of course, you can't let yourself in. You need to locate some shards. In the midst of all of this, the inhabitants of the island who are being influenced by the piece of Eden attack. And how do you deal with this? You kill them, of course. The people that Eivor is there to save, and she just cuts their heads off like any other enemy. Naturally, the girls have a bit of a falling out. Cassandra's presence on the island may have activated the piece of Eden, and she hasn't been very forthcoming about that. So Eivor decides she can't trust her anymore, and was sent off to every corner of the island to locate the shards to open the vault. Once you've got the shards and open the door, then there's one last puzzle before you can open another door. It all ends well. Cassandra saves Eivor from the piece of Eden, and then they go on a date. Well, it looked like a date. The downside to all of this crossover is there just isn't enough of it. The plot is solid but short, too short to comfortably build a friendship between Eivor and Cassandra. What they do works. It's like a condensed buddy cop film, the opposing partners who become friends. Or it's a rom-com. I mean, it's a thin line between the two. The interactions between the two by the end work and do Eivor and Cassandra justice. It's just a shame we had to move through the gears of enemies, reluctant partners, grudging respect, enemies again, and friends so quickly. Overall, I'd say the whole crossover is worth it, and I don't say that often about Ubisoft DLC. It was an enjoyable few hours. I'd say Odyssey was the stronger of the two. The story didn't feel as rushed, and it leads you quite nicely across the island of Corfu, while I felt Valhalla did what it always does and sends you from one side of the map all the way to the other, leaving you to have to go massively off course to do anything. My only other criticism is minor, and its characterisation. Cassandra is written perfectly, especially in the Valhalla half of the crossover. And I'm sorry, anybody who says she has no personality or was a psychopath because of the dialogue choices in Odyssey, well, they couldn't have been paying attention. There were certain plot points and reactions from Cassandra that you couldn't change, and Phoebe's death was one of them, and those feelings ran all the way through the second DLC and through to this. The same goes for a sense of humour.
Why is it suddenly causing problems now? Loki got bored? So serious.
However, I thought they didn't get Eivor right. Or they did. Too right. but they got Eivor right as far as her personality and behaviour at the start of Valhalla.
Nothing is too powerful for me. Besides, I'm sure I'll make better use of this weapon than you.
Fine. I've had enough of you anyway. You're impossible. You're too brash, Eivor. And it will undo you.
This bothered me because I've completed Eivor's story. I've seen her go from brash and headstrong to a level-headed, well-rounded leader. The Siege of Paris DLC has Eivor voicing her desire to no longer have to fight. This development of Eivor's character was the one saving grace I found in the whole of that DLC. So for Eivor to go back to being very brash felt wrong to me. While I do believe her encounter with Cassandra would bring out a bit of a bragging streak in Eivor, for her to be so carefree at times and be called out on it was jarring. Like I said, it's what the game is, not really necessarily an issue with the story mission. And with all that being said, I can't work out what Ubisoft are doing. Are they up to something? Both missions are well polished for free content, and they're actually quite substantial, being between 2 to 3 hours of gameplay for each mission, depending on how quickly you play through or how much you explore the 2 new islands. I think this is what surprises me the most, because Ubisoft have put some shocking free content out for Valhalla in the past year. I know, I've complained about at least one of them in a video. That was a shameless plug, there will be a link in the description for that. Quite frankly, if they'd padded out the Valhalla part of the crossover with some slightly slower pacing of the story and thrown in a few more side activities, I would have happily accepted this as a third, smaller piece of DLC in the first year season pass. Why didn't Ubisoft monetize this in any way? Not that I'm trying to give them ideas or anything, I just think that's why I'm so confused. As well as some very poor quality free DLC, I've had a few complaints about their paid DLC in the past year too, so for this to be quite so solid in quality has floored me. Don't get me wrong, neither part of the story moves out of its comfort zone as far as gameplay goes. In Odyssey you've still got bandit camps aplenty, and still in Valhalla we're having to puzzle our way past a locked door. But it works. It all works. I think the only real glitches or bugs I encountered was a soldier on a horse clipped clean through Cassandra in a cutscene, and in Valhalla Eivor would occasionally glow a golden colour, which I think links into a rune I had enabled on some of my gear. I changed my loadout and it stopped. That's it. Everything worked. For something free, I would never have thought they'd try and mix the gameplay up anyway. But all I want from the free content is that it works, and this does. Not that I think Valhalla had much success with mixing up the formula anyway. Just look at the stealthy infiltration of Paris for that. Those black box style assassinations didn't fit with either the story or the style of the game. The biggest enjoyment of the black box missions in Unity and Syndicate was going and doing them again to see what the other outcomes would be, and that's not possible in Valhalla. Of the two, I think Odyssey does the most to shake things up because Cassandra loses all of her special abilities, and it turns combat and stealth on its head because for the last quarter of the game, you have to approach situations differently. I certainly did. I also think Odyssey does a better job of distinguishing Corfu from all the Greek islands. There's different colours and the flowers and the wildlife is a bit different. I walked through a bush and some hummingbirds flew out. It was a nice touch. The Isle of Skye in Valhalla just looks like England, again, with a touch of colour for some flowers occasionally. I keep wondering if Ubisoft are testing the waters. Is this the kind of thing we could see in Assassin's Creed Infinity? Or is it just fan service? It seems like expensive fan service, so I do think they'll be looking closely to see what the reaction to this is. I'd like to think we get more content like this. I'd love them to go back to Unity, and especially to Syndicate. But realistically, I think if we're going to see anything like this again before Infinity, it'll be a crossover with Origins, or Valhalla again. Most of all, it feels like a love letter to Odyssey, and especially to Cassandra. It develops her character in a meaningful way. She's given a reason to stray into the stories of all the other games, and by removing all of her magical spear abilities, it grounds her to a more realistic level of skill, like the other protagonists in the franchise. It feels like she finally fits with the franchise. Something I could never really say was true, no matter how much I loved Odyssey or Cassandra. So, at the end of all of that, where is Randvi? Has anybody bothered to look for her? What was it you said, Eivor?
I know Randvi's whereabouts better than most, and she isn't... what I mean to say is...
You know better than anyone where she is, do you? She's been stood here the whole time.
Randvi's here.
You want to get yourself a new seer. Valka has been on the wrong mushrooms again. Thanks for watching. Drop me a comment to let me know what you thought of the crossover content. If you've enjoyed what you've watched, give it a thumbs up, or subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll be back soon with another video.